She was foaming at the mouth, at the nose. Whatever it was, my daughter was possessed.
This testimony was collected in 1992 and is part of the file of one of the most prominent modern exorcism cases. Yes, what you're hearing is true. There is a file in the police archives that still causes an uncomfortable silence whenever it's mentioned. It's not the record of a homicide, nor an act of terrorism, nor an unsolved disappearance. It's something different, something that defies logic, science, and common sense. It's a report that certifies, under official signatures, the possibility that the supernatural has broken into the real world. And that would just be the tip of the iceberg. Behind all the media frenzy that the matter stirred up, there's a story involving a dead girl. Family conflicts and controversies that shock not just a country but the entire world. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What happened inside those four walls? Had a portal to the afterlife really been opened through a Ouija game? What explanation do the most skeptical people offer? What happened to the main people involved in the event? What? Over 30 years later, how did it impact everything that followed? The way in which esotericism was viewed at that time? How much of it was real and how much was simply a hoax orchestrated by unscrupulous people seeking fame or money? Come back, come back, come back. Come back. Come back. To answer these and other questions, let's set aside our prejudices and delve into the dark Vallecas case. Before we begin, it's worth clarifying that beyond what you may think, there are different versions of this case. As time went by, the main characters made small but decisive changes to their testimonies. As always, we are going to remain objective in the investigation. We are going to show you first-hand audio recordings from the police officers involved, and you will be the ones to draw your own conclusions at the end of the report. Also, if you're interested in us continuing to investigate paranormal cases, as well as possessions or things like that, write the word possession in the comments. If we have more than 500 people writing possession, we will make a second part. Now let's get started. The Gutiérrez Lázaro family. The legend claims it began with a homemade Ouija board, a sheet of paper, letters in black marker, and a glass. That was enough for a group of kids to decide to ignore the relevant warnings and give themselves the chance to contact the spirit world. Their excuse was dramatic, trying to contact the classmate's deceased boyfriend as a teenage gesture of comfort and affection. That trigger was all those young people needed to finally gather the courage and face what adults called the forbidden game. Didn't they realize they were condemning themselves? However, before understanding what happened that day, when one of those kids would never be the same again, it's necessary to give a bit of context. For this, we're going to travel to a place where no one would expect anything extraordinary to happen. A humble neighborhood in the south of Madrid, simple streets, rundown buildings, brick, local shops, neighbors who know each other's names and greet each other every day. Vallecas is not a gothic postcard or a setting built for mystery. Before the 1990s, it wasn't known for having a large number of urban legends or anything like that. It was actually quite the opposite, something similar to what you could call normal. Maybe that's why the case is so shocking, because if what happened there could happen there, then it could happen in any country. Why not in my neighborhood or yours? The Gutiérrez Lázaro family lived in a modest apartment located right on Luis Marin Street in the Vallecas neighborhood. Concepcion, the mother, was the house's emotional center. The first impression that emerges about her defines her as a strong and protective woman. When the family was overwhelmed by discouragement or unexpected problems, she kept everything together. Maximiliano, the father, was hardworking and often away from home. He stayed away from bad company and had a calm temperament, and in the police records he is described as a rather cooperative and quiet individual. Both had raised 6 children. They were a large family, where routine was built around responsibilities, simple meals, occasional laughter, and arguments, just like in any home. To clarify, they weren't a family marked by tragedy, extreme beliefs, or any link to the supernatural. They were just ordinary neighbors. You could assume they were people who went to work every morning, shopped at the usual stores, and maintained a cordial relationship with those around them. Nothing in their history suggested that they would end up at the center of one of the most controversial paranormal episodes ever documented in Spain. The apartment that housed them would become sadly famous, and to this day, it is believed that its location might carry a malignant aura. For a long time, the family would become an attraction for the curious private investigators, fans of gruesome stories, and journalists hungry for a scoop. We'll discuss that aspect later, but the historical context also helps us build a clearer picture of what was about to happen. As we noted, it was the early 1990s, and the country was emerging from its latest shadow. And little by little, it was building a new social and cultural identity, social television, to change. Pablo Sanchez to change to Juan Pablo Sanchez that the situation is going to the president. Tomican for Chad. Ulises from Tomican Ulises. Ulises Tomican was captured by R. This Ulises Tomican was captured by R. Tis. He moved between the playful and the dangerous at that time. This communication board between worlds, created by the lawyer and inventor Elijah Jefferson Bond. It wasn't necessarily bought in specialty stores. You could get it at toy stores, or, as we suggested a few minutes ago. If it came to it, you could improvise in a time without the internet, where information traveled by word of mouth, expanding and changing at will. Adolescence was an especially fertile ground for myths. All kinds of stories were told when the power went out on a stormy night, or when evening fell and there were no adults around. They were stories that gave you chills and moved between the believable and the fantastic, creating an undeniable magnetism. They say that if you put your finger and ask something, it answers. They say that if you laugh or make fun of it, it gets angry. The whispers multiplied. And these were stories that for many young people meant a way to approach the sacred and the unknown without many intermediaries. Estefanía, the eldest daughter of the Gutiérrez Lázaro family, was much like other teenagers of her era. Many people say that in that analog world, without so many screens, imagination was more alive and the doors opened more easily. They say bluntly that it was a more dangerous world, a world that, without further ado, would end up pushing Estefanía into an abyss with no return. The incident. Estefanía was often forced to take care of her other siblings, a task she did without complaining and with a good attitude. She occasionally worked, always prioritizing financial support for the household. Ultimately, she was a responsible young woman and everyone knew they could trust her. In addition, she was known for always having a smile and offering a kind word to anyone who needed it. She got good grades at school, and although she suffered some bullying because of her weight, she had made good friends. Everyone agreed that she had a great future ahead of her, at least until the Ouija incident happened. Our research shows there are two versions of the story. There are interviews where Estefanía's siblings claim that she had already tried to contact the afterlife with her friends, an experience that would have led to a violent incident involving one of the participants. Later, it's the siblings themselves who claim that the first time Estefanía played was when she did it at the school. Is that when things began to go wrong? Or was it the key moment when something that already existed but remained hidden began to manifest itself? The classroom was like any other. Desks lined up, blackboards with remnants of equations, educational posters on the walls. Estefanía and her friends waited until everyone left the classroom to carry out their plan. A simple plan, but one that had everyone on edge. They wanted to contact the dead boyfriend of one of them. They didn't want to open a portal to attract dark forces. They just wanted to send a final greeting or get the last words from someone they had known and missed. They were young people coping with an early unfair loss. The intention was full of pain, need, and the blind force that often comes with grief. There was no ceremony, no candles or pentagrams. However, when they realized that the speculations were over and the moment of truth was approaching, a heavy silence filled everything. Here, again, there are some inconsistencies. Some talk about a formal Ouija board. Others talk about a more homemade Ouija. Details more, details less. Everyone agrees on the essentials. The glass began to slide slowly at first, then with firmness. The girls took their hands away several times, denying it, laughing nervously, then putting their fingers back on. The atmosphere grew heavier, something in the room changed temperature, then the classroom door opened abruptly. A teacher came in, indignant, surprised by what she was seeing. Before they could react, the frightened girls lifted their fingers and the glass fell to the floor. The woman who had just arrived broke the Ouija board in indignation. According to witnesses, that moment marked the start of the horror. They say that something like a whitish smoke came out of the broken glass, and even though everyone moved, it didn't disperse. It was as if it had a predetermined direction, its target. Estefanía, her friends, including one of her sisters, later claimed that they could see how the smoke entered through her mouth and nose. From that day on, Estefanía began to change. First, there were fainting spells, sporadic convulsions, dizziness with no apparent medical cause, then came the shadows. She said someone was following her, and even in crowds, she heard voices without a physical source. Her nights became battlefields. She would wake up agitated, as if she had been running, her gaze fixed on something only she could see. Her dark circles grew larger, and slowly the humor that had characterized her began to fade. Now she pressed her lips together, serious and confused, forcing a smile, and when she did, it didn't seem real, it fell flat. What was happening? Had Estefanía brought something or someone with her? Although her friends tried not to be alarmed, it was impossible not to conclude that something strange was going on. No one, however, expected Estefanía to end up. How did she end up? The deterioration? What followed after the incident was not a sudden change, but a steady decline, a slow yet constant descent into something that no one could clearly explain. The first episodes of seizures led the family to visit hospitals, clinics, and private practices. The doctors observed, analyzed, requested more tests, and compared results, but according to Concepcion, all they got were vague diagnoses. No label really fit. They talked about psychological symptoms, stress, and unresolved grief. They prescribed her pills that worked for a few days but soon became ineffective. Estefanía went in and out of hospital stays, and every discharge came with the same phrase, repeated in different variations. People said things would improve with time, but they actually got worse. The family returned home knowing less than they did before leaving, and what happened in private was even worse. Estefanía claimed that a shadow was watching her from the corner of the room. Sometimes she encountered that presence in the hallway, other times next to her bed. She described a tall, featureless figure, just eyes. There were nights when her screams alarmed the whole house. She would wake up gasping, saying that someone had grabbed her arm, that they had tried to drag her, that they whispered to her, saying her name over and over again. Sometimes her mouth would fill with foam. It was as if a part of her was being slowly drained. Within weeks, she began talking to herself and would sit motionless, staring at a spot on the ceiling. She would laugh or cry suddenly without explanation. She seemed to be divided, one part still present, trying to hold on to reality, the other dragged into a hell as invisible as it was deep. The girl also began to say that voices were coming from the bathroom in her room. Sometimes they sounded like a choir trying to calm her, and other times they were just mocking shrieks. At the same time, an unusual feeling began to grow within all the family members, the feeling that they were not alone on the property. It was clear that whatever followed Estefanía was becoming part of their group. Death. The convulsions grew more violent, lasted longer, or became more severe. Estefanía's nights were full of shocks, and her days were filled with a tiredness that didn't match her age. She was no longer the cheerful young woman who once walked through Vallecas with lively, enthusiastic eyes. In July 1991, the situation reached its peak. Estefanía began telling her loved ones that she was going to die. Her mother tried to downplay it. The death, 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 the death. July 13th in the early morning. On that occasion, Estefanía violently attacked her sister Marianela, growled at her, scratched her, and showed her teeth as if she were possessed by a beast. At times, she had brief moments of clarity and, with a broken voice, asked what was happening to her and why. Then she'd return to growling and howling uncontrollably. She was eventually taken to Gregorio Marañón Hospital, where doctors said she had a severe cataleptic episode and fell into a coma. She passed away on July 14th. The autopsy could not determine the cause of her death, classifying it as sudden and suspicious death. Burying a daughter is a pain no parent is prepared for, but burying a daughter without reason, without answers, without sense, it's a wound that never heals. The Gutiérrez Lázaro family faced an impossible grief. Something had killed Estefanía, but no one could say what. When they returned home, a suffocating atmosphere greeted them. Death was supposed to put an end to what had started at the school, that whatever had possessed Estefanía, whatever had been haunting her, should disappear with her. But it didn't. The nights, which had once been turbulent only for Estefanía, now began to disturb the whole family with more and more intensity. Banging on the walls, whispers in the hallway, shadows crossing from one room to another, doors opening by themselves. Someone, after making the sign of the cross, warned them they were in the presence of a poltergeist. The Vallecas poltergeist. What followed was a chain of events that turned the family home into a territory straight out of a horror movie. Let's hear how 3 of Estefanía's siblings described it.
My sister died on July 14th, 1991, and a month and a half later, things started to happen.
They threw knives and glasses at us. That was the least of what happened in my house. Because we saw the shadow my sister saw on the floor. We saw the monks my sister saw.
We were all in the living room, and one of my brothers, a glass didn't hit him on the head because it broke before it reached him. It came out of the kitchen and shattered just before hitting him. Otherwise, it would have hit him on the head too. There's no explanation for that, or seeing a ball coming towards you down the hallway.
When I go out into the hallway, I see a shape in the hallway, which then disappears. I don't see anything else after that. Noises, we've heard a lot of them.
It was as if something had been left unfinished, as if the presence that had accompanied Estefanía during her last months had lost its anchor and was now looking to hold on to something else. The first sign appeared weeks after the funeral. It started at night when all the lights were off. It became common for doors that were closed when going to bed to be found open at dawn. There were also frequent knocks on the walls, dry and persistent, as if someone were trying to knock from inside the concrete. Maximiliano tried to convince his children that it was just the wind, that it was nothing more than that. But the little ones, already shaken by the sudden death of their sister, soon fell into chaos. Everyone was on edge. And the concept of home had vanished from that property, which now seemed to be governed by its own terrifying rules. Early one morning, while everyone slept, a glass shattered in the kitchen. There was no fall, no impact, no movement. It simply exploded as if it had been struck by an invisible force. The mother ran down the stairs, her heart in her throat, and found the glass scattered across the floor, shining under the dim light. In the living room, on one of the walls, there were several crosses hanging. They were simple reminders of a quiet, unassuming faith. One morning, the family found all those crosses upside down, perfectly inverted, as if a patient and deliberate hand had taken the time to intervene. Another day, a picture frame with Estefanía's photo appeared upside down. The glass was intact, but the photo inside showed signs of having caught fire. How could that be? The family members began locking the doors and moving the furniture to block those doors that seemed to come alive in the middle of the night. The family dog grew skittish and nervous, often growling in corners and sometimes peeing in place while crying, as if witnessing something that only his canine eyes could see. One of the sisters ran out of the house on an occasion when her dolls started moving on their own. She preferred to sleep on a park bench rather than witness that phenomenon again. The shadows became part of the routine. They moved quickly, always at the edge of vision, roaming the hallways, crossing in front of the rooms, sliding around the corners. For Concepcion, the worst happened when a presence became a regular in her room. A presence that touched her legs and sometimes her hair. A presence that chilled the air and called her mom. The woman contacted a priest who, in a stern tone, told her not to listen to that voice under any circumstances. That her daughter was already gone, that something was trying to ambush her. The man gave her holy water and recommended that she pray with all her strength. The family started sleeping with the lights on and moved all the mattresses to the central room. The neighbors clearly knew what was happening. They heard banging, dragging, and screams at all hours. Some preferred to think that the family was still trapped in grief, while others looked away so they wouldn't have to face the truth. The Gutiérrez Lázaro family started to be seen as oddballs. As if dealing with those problems wasn't enough, many of their closest friends started to distance themselves. Unable to understand what was happening or unable to understand why, everyone looked worse and worse. They lost a daughter, so it was understandable they weren't well. But hearing Concepcion talk about the things she felt and saw gave everyone goosebumps. The house on Luis Marin Street had become a place where the invisible had taken shape. At a certain point, they came to the conclusion that they could only do one thing, no matter how silly the plan seemed. They called the police. They wanted at least someone to believe them and leave a record of what was happening. On November 27, 1992, the Gutiérrez family dialed 911. Inspector José Pedro Negri and his team arrived at the scene during the night. After 2 a.m., the whole family was outside the house in the rain, terrified. Meanwhile, a couple of officers stayed outside with them and listened to the whole story. Inspector Negri and 2 other officers entered the house without suspecting what awaited them. And that's how our story goes back to the beginning. The police file. The officers entered with flashlights and recorded everything. The mattresses in the dining room because nobody wanted to sleep, just the furniture moved out of place without explanation, the marks on the walls. According to the police report, the officers agreed to turn off the lights, since, according to the Gutiérrez Lázaro family, it was under those conditions that the entity seemed to become stronger. Just then, with everything off, the door of a large piece of furniture suddenly flew open and slammed shut. According to the family, all of Estefania's medical reports were kept there. Let's listen to Negri himself tell it in his own words.
And suddenly, unexpectedly, a door of a piece of furniture opened like that and slammed shut forcefully. I wasn't prepared because I immediately said to turn on the light, and we inspected the area to see if there was any device. And we didn't see anything strange. We saw that, well, that had happened. That's exactly what happened up to that point. I couldn't believe it.
The police approached them for the procedure. They brought them closer for the procedure. The police approached them for the procedure. Convinced that they were about to catch the prankster, they ran to the place only to find that everything was empty. Then, in one of the rooms, things got stranger and stranger.
We saw that the crucifix turned upside down, but also the crucifix that was lying on the floor came off. And that's something I also have to tell you. I don't know who would do it, or I don't know, or if it was set up. I can't say for sure because I wasn't there. I was inside the room, but there were some scratches, some very, very, very serious scratches, like from a claw, but all over the door.
Again, in Star's room, Negri saw something else that caught his attention. Near a telephone, there was a strange substance, something sticky that he couldn't identify. Unfortunately, the man didn't take a sample. As he makes clear in the next audio, he prioritized calling his superiors.
When the matter was over, I went to the nearest police station and the duty chief wrote an information report.
At 2:40 a.m. on H50 Channel 7, Z2 calls and states that after speaking with the family and observing the inside of the house, according to what he says, it gave him goosebumps.
For the first time in Spain, was there a police record of something that could be identified outside of rational parameters? That night, the family didn't get any solutions, explanations, or relief. The presence didn't disappear, but something changed. For the first time, someone else was a witness. someone external who wasn't emotionally involved. Would this help them at all? Well, for a few days, yes. For a few days, the Gutiérrez Lázaro family felt less alone. But then the matter gained importance, and the seriousness of the case only increased. Theories. As time went by, the case of Estefanía and her family attracted journalists, paranormal investigators, and skeptics who wanted to debunk the myth, and believers who saw in her case the proof that there are things that go beyond our understanding. What happened in that house was not confined within its walls. It went beyond and took on a life of its own.
Well, we're still live here, and it's 11 and almost 38 minutes. Sorry, almost 28 minutes. Sometimes the police don't just arrest the bad guys, sometimes they even have to chase ghosts. Ghosts like the ones that kept the neighbors of a house in the Vallecas neighborhood of Madrid awake at night. What was happening there was anything but normal. It was actually paranormal.
The classic paranormal explanation. He suggested that what haunted the Gutiérrez family was not the spirit of Estefanía, but something that came through her. They say when the Ouija board broke that afternoon, it wasn't just the board, but a boundary, Estefanía, physically and emotionally weakened. Could the channel have been an entryway for something that wants to remain, not communicate? An entity that wasn't human, but something older, something that fed on suffering and fear. Under that perspective, the presence in the house wasn't the echo of a lost young woman, but a shadow that found a place to anchor itself. The psychological theory, however, focused on the family's minds. The supporters of this view claim that everything was the result of a traumatic grief, an abrupt loss that left open wounds. The death of a teenager can cause deep cracks, guilt, sadness, pain, and the need to find meaning can lead to what is known as collective hysteria, a phenomenon in which fear is shared, amplified, and ends up taking on an almost physical presence. The noises, the shadows, the objects that seem to move on their own, according to this theory, were nothing more than the mind trying to justify the unjustifiable, and the body trying to give shape to the emptiness. The strictest skeptical view sees what happened as perceptual errors, nerves, and sensory distortions. They argue that an old house moves, creaks, expands, and contracts, and that the electricity can fail, that testimonies contaminate each other, and that memory becomes distorted over time, and that the media, always hungry for sensationalism, took what happened and shaped it to sell mystery. At that time, special emphasis and analogies were made with a case that happened a few decades earlier, specifically in 1976. We're talking about the Annalise Michel case. Let's do a brief review of it to understand why it was compared to Estefanía's case. The Annalise Michel case. Annalise Michel was born in 1952 in Litvin, a small town in Bavaria, Germany. She grew up in a deeply devout Catholic family, marked by a strict religiosity that included constant practices of penance, confession, and prayer. From a young age, she was known for being reserved, sensitive, and obedient. There were no visible signs of anything out of the ordinary. However, everything would start to change when she turned 16. However, the President of the Republic, 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 the President of the Republic. They were whispering, insulting her, telling her she was doomed. As time went by, her personality also began to change. She went from being a structured and calm young woman to being consumed by inner torment. At the university where she was studying to become a teacher, she isolated herself from the rest. Some days she couldn't enter the chapel. She said that an invisible force hated her, pushed her back, as if her mere presence profaned the place. At that point, her inner circle started seeking help beyond the medical field. They asked various priests for authorization to perform an exorcism, but the Catholic Church is extremely cautious with these requests. Most refused, advising the young woman to continue psychiatric treatment. In 1975, Father Ernest Olt, a priest who claimed to recognize signs of possession, became convinced Annalise's case was not psychological. He claimed she reacted violently to holy water, avoided crucifixes, and couldn't pray without stumbling over the words. Father Alt sent documentation to the local bishop after reviewing reports, testimonies, and photographs. Bishop Joseph Stang authorized a formal exorcism under the Roman ritual, and Father Arnold Renz was assigned for this purpose. Between September 1975 and July 1976, 67 exorcism sessions were carried out, usually once or twice a week, each lasting several hours. Regardless of the spiritual interpretation, what is verifiable is the physical and psychological decline that emerged. Annalise stopped eating, she would hit herself against the walls, and she would kneel and stand up hundreds of times in a row as part of obsessive rituals, until her knees were covered in bruises and wounds. She weighed less than 30 kilos and could barely walk. Her parents and the priests interpreted this weakness as part of the struggle against an evil force. Annalise Michel died on July 1, 1976 at 23. The autopsy found malnutrition and dehydration as the cause. The next year, a trial started at the Aschaffenburg court. Annalise's parents and the priests Renz and Alt were charged with negligent homicide for not seeking proper medical treatment. When the young woman's health chronically worsened, it got worse. Hers worsened. Oh, wait. That. But no. Case. They began to find an echo in what happened in Vallecas. Was there, behind the supposed paranormal story, a clear human factor? Was it all about a tormented family? Not by demons, but by their own negligence. Ignorance and poor advice were the cornerstone of the case. While some debated this, others preferred to double down and kept insisting that what was happening had its roots in things beyond science. One of them was Tristan Breaker, a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator who showed up at the house, proposed a controversial theory, and even performed an exorcism at the site. The grandfather, Estefanía Tristan, had a reputation that preceded him, appeared on many of Spain's most watched shows, and talked about paranormal cases, supported by a society that, as we mentioned, was deeply in tune with these matters. We must remember that during those years, people like Fernando Jiménez del Oso set records with their esoteric publications. Fernando Jiménez del Oso was a leading figure in spreading mystery topics in Spanish during the late 20th century. Psychiatrist by training, journalist and communicator by vocation. His involvement in paranormal cases was not based on direct experimentation or on seeking extraordinary phenomena firsthand, but rather on analyzing, interpreting, and presenting testimonies and documents. With a unique blend of precision and subtlety. As a psychiatrist, he understood the human mind, its distortions, traumas, and projections, but he also publicly acknowledged something uncommon in his field, that not everything can be explained. The one from The King's Urgency of Shame by Lancelmo Castelbinari. Paranormal investigators. He was too cautious for his audience. He was a guide on the border between reason and mystery. That's why, more than a hunter of the paranormal, Fernando Jiménez del Oso was an architect of the narrative of mystery in the Spanish-speaking world. But Tristan Breaker didn't belong to the same scene. Tristan was more talkative. He didn't hesitate to speculate about the wildest possibilities and invented devices to contact the afterlife. Known for his eccentricity, it was unsurprising to many when he arrived at the Gutiérrez Lázaro house with a medium. Upon arrival, he conducted experiments and claimed two presences were fighting for control of the property. On one hand, a positive and harmonious presence, which he identified as Estefanía, and on the other, an evil presence, a dark and corrupt force, which the family members soon recognized as the grandfather, Concepción's father. Apparently, the man had economic problems with his daughter, and before he died, he had expressed his desire to make life impossible for all of them. Could he be right? Tristan, was it a vengeful and familiar spirit that kept haunting the poor family? Tristan also claimed that Estefanía's bathroom, where she heard voices, was the portal that connected the worlds, and that's where he locked himself in with the medium to perform a sort of exorcism, which was recorded and sparked all kinds of reactions. Here you can judge it for yourselves. Come back! Come back. Come back! However, the prominent paranormal investigator left the story when he told the Gutiérrez Lázaro family that he could help them get rid of everything for a large sum of money. At that moment, they stopped seeing him as a possible savior and started seeing him as a fraud. As can be seen, the revolution caused by the Vallecas case file was unprecedented. Everywhere people talked about them to try to help them, to make fun of them, to call them liars, or to treat them as victims of their environment. Everyone had their own version of events and their own conclusion. Over time, the house on Luis Marin Street suffocated the Gutiérrez Lázaro family. It wasn't just the memory of Estefanía that weighed in those hallways, but the certainty that something had remained there. Watching, waiting, inhabiting the corners, like an unwelcome guest whom no one had invited and who refused to leave. The phenomena did not lessen over time. On the contrary, it seemed that the void left by the young woman created a space for whatever it was to manifest itself even more strongly. The mother, worn out by sleepless nights from the banging, which no longer surprised her, and by fear seeping into the walls like damp. She made this same decision many families before and after would make in similar situations: to leave. Gradually, people stopped discussing the matter until Estefanía's now adult siblings began investigating the case. Memory of the case. The movie Verónica, by director Paco Plaza, creator of REC, took the essence of the case, wrapped it in dramatization and turned it into a cinematic story. It offered a tense, dark, and visually powerful version, but it altered the facts, exaggerated some, omitted others, and simplified many. The real Estefanía was diluted among special effects, and the need for cinema to impose rhythm, symbolism, and conflict. For many, it was the first time they heard the name of the Vallecas case. For others, it was an unfair distortion. Nevertheless, what the movie achieved was to rekindle the myth, put it back into circulation, and remind the audience that this story existed before the script. Today, the Vallecas case exists between myth and fact, blending personal memory and popular story. It's not just a family story marked by tragedy, nor simply a disturbing police file, nor only an urban legend, nor a reinvented cultural product. Is it all of that at once? And it didn't take long for the waters to part when cracks began to appear among the siblings of Estefanía Gutiérrez Lázaro. In El Mundo interviews, some siblings said the Vallecas case events weren't paranormal. They maintained that the young woman suffered from convulsive epilepsy and that her strange behaviors were due to a general state of suggestion. After her attempt to contact a spirit through a Ouija board, something that, according to them, the family stopped paying attention to. However, they made a much more serious accusation. According to them, it was always her mother who was in charge of orchestrating everything. Her mother was the one who made sure not to talk about Estefanía's real disorders to the press, and she was also the one who forced them to move things around when they were visited. Journalists or investigators say that Concepción even hid the fact that she herself was medicated for the same reasons as Estefanía. Is it all about a woman who wanted to be in the spotlight for money? Was she also suffering from a condition that required a visit to the doctor? What can be concluded about Concepción, victim or perpetrator? On the other hand, other siblings claim they saw things that are impossible to explain, even if you want to believe that the mother of them all conspired to drive them crazy. Some still insist Estefanía spoke in tongues and even levitated. How could that be faked? Some say Estefanía's body was exhumed and a photo of her parents' wedding, as she requested, was placed in her grave, which helped calm things down. Others say that it's impossible to trust the family, since they all have their own interests, either because they no longer want to be linked to the case or because they want to keep taking advantage of it. Every time a platform shows up with millions to interview them, when a story ends, there is usually closure, a final period, but in the Vallecas case, that never happened. What was left wasn't clarity, but a persistent doubt that sticks to anyone who comes into contact with the story. Deep down, what lingers from the Vallecas case isn't proof of a spirit or evidence of collective disorder. What remains is a discomfort, a kind of inner whisper that forces us to face something we'd rather keep at bay. That there are blurry lines between what we think we control and what we don't, and that the reasons Half an hour and a half, a moment of situation, you drool over weaknesses. It hurts me, haha, what it is to be a... That navigation manifests applaud the Babu warehouse, it makes me want to adjust. What do we do with a story that we can't prove or deny? How can we draw a moral or a conclusion when everything is shrouded in the most imperturbable of shadows? And on the other hand, are we sure that everything is over? As an epilogue, we leave you with the testimony of a police inspector who followed this case very closely. Before we go, please like, subscribe and turn on notifications. Here are a couple of videos for you to keep binge watching. That's all. Listen to what the police officer says.
That apartment was sold and currently a South American family lives there. They have never seen anything unusual in the place except for one thing. One day, the son said he was taking a shower and, well, from inside the shower, he heard someone knocking on the door. He thought it was his parents letting him know about something. He finishes showering and hears those knocks on the door again. He opens the door, finds no one, gets scared, and goes out to the street.